The sky over Europe was already burning. At 18,000 feet, the roar of engines echoed through cold, thin air as a formation of German fighters clawed their way toward a lone silhouette ahead. 30 of them. Dark crosses on their wings. Veteran pilots of the Luftwaffe. And in front of them, a fighter they barely respected. Radio chatter crackled through German headsets. There it is, the American crate. This will be quick. The aircraft was bulky, slow to climb. Too heavy for the kind of tight dogfighting the Germans had mastered over years of war. On paper it was hopeless. But as the distance closed, something unexpected happened. The lone American pilot didn't turn away. He dove straight toward them. The sky erupted with tracer fire. Machine guns thundered. The aircraft that many had mocked suddenly became a wall of steel and fury in the sky. Within minutes, German pilots realized something chilling. This hopeless fighter could absorb punishment that would rip other planes apart, and keep fighting. And on that day, against overwhelming odds, one pilot would prove the skeptics wrong, stopping wave after wave of German attackers almost single-handedly. To understand how this moment happened, we have to go back to the aircraft everyone underestimated. The fighter they called too heavy, too slow, and completely outdated. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt. The altitude needle trembled as the aircraft clawed higher through the frozen air over occupied Europe. Frost crept along the inside of the cockpit glass while the engine roared like a living thing in front of the pilot. Below, the continent was hidden under a blanket of clouds. Above, the war waited. A warning crackled through the radio. Bandits incoming. Multiple contacts. Northeast. Closing fast. The pilot's eyes scanned the sky. At first there was nothing. Then tiny black specks appeared along the horizon, growing larger every second. German fighters. Not 2. Not 5. Dozens. They climbed in tight formation, sunlight flashing across their wings. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke Wulf Fw 190s, the backbone of the Luftwaffe's fighter force. Veteran hunters of the European skies. Their target was obvious. Far ahead, a formation of American bombers droned forward in slow, heavy formation. B-17 flying fortresses loaded with bombs, fuel, and crews who depended entirely on their escorts for survival. If the German fighters reached them, the sky would become a slaughterhouse. But between those bombers and the incoming swarm stood something unexpected. Just one fighter. The German pilots saw it too. A single American aircraft hanging in the sky like an obstacle that barely deserved attention. Over German radios, the tone was almost casual. One escort fighter. Thunderbolt. Ignore it. The aircraft they were talking about looked massive compared to most fighters of the era. Thick fuselage. Wide wings. Heavy frame. Many Luftwaffe pilots believed it was too slow to be dangerous in a real dogfight. Too bulky to outmaneuver their lighter fighters. Some even joked that it flew like a loaded truck with wings. But the lone American pilot staring through his gun sight knew something they didn't. His aircraft was not built to dance in the sky. It was built to survive it. He pushed the throttle forward. The massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine answered instantly, the propeller clawing at the thin air. The aircraft surged ahead. The distance between the fighters collapsed. 30 German aircraft. 1 American pilot. The logical move would have been to turn away, regroup, wait for help. Instead, the Thunderbolt accelerated directly toward them. For a moment the sky froze in silence. Then 8.50 caliber machine guns ignited at once. Tracer rounds streaked forward like lines of fire. And suddenly the aircraft that German pilots had mocked as slow and hopeless was ripping straight through the center of their formation. In the next few minutes, the sky would turn into chaos. Because the fighter everyone underestimated had just made a decision that would shock the Luftwaffe. He wasn't trying to survive. He was trying to stop them all. And somehow, he almost did. The fighter no one believed in. When the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt first appeared in 1942, even some American pilots doubted it. Compared to sleek fighters like the British Spitfire or the German Messerschmitt Bf 109, the Thunderbolt looked enormous. Its massive fuselage was wrapped around a gigantic Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp radial engine, one of the most powerful engines ever placed in a fighter aircraft. Fully loaded, the P-47 weighed more than many twin-engine planes. It struggled to climb quickly. Early pilots complained it felt sluggish compared to lighter fighters. German intelligence reports dismissed it. Too large. Too heavy. Poor maneuverability. But what those reports missed was what the Thunderbolt had been built for. Not elegance. Survival. And once American pilots learned how to use it properly, the P-47 would become one of the most dangerous fighters in the skies over Europe. Built like a flying tank, the Thunderbolt was designed around brute strength. 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns lined its wings. Together they could unleash nearly 100 rounds per second, shredding aircraft or ground targets in seconds. It could dive faster than almost any fighter of the war, exceeding 500 miles per hour in a steep descent. But its greatest advantage was durability. The thick radial engine at its nose could absorb heavy damage and still keep running. The aircraft's rugged airframe could survive hits that would destroy more fragile fighters. Many P-47 pilots returned to base with wings riddled with holes, engines smoking, pieces of metal missing. And yet the Thunderbolt kept flying. German pilots eventually gave it a nickname: Der Fliegende Panzer, the flying tank, the mission that changed everything. By 1943, American bombers were pushing deeper into Nazi-occupied Europe. B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators carried out daylight bombing raids against factories, rail hubs and oil facilities inside Germany. But those bombers needed protection. That's where the P-47 came in. Thunderbolt squadrons began escorting bomber formations across hostile skies filled with flak and intercepting fighters. One mission over Germany would become legendary among pilots. A formation of American bombers was heading toward a strategic target when radar stations detected a large group of German interceptors climbing to attack. Within minutes, nearly 30 Luftwaffe fighters were moving toward the bombers. Messerschmitt Bf 109s and Focke Wulf Fw 190s, some of the most feared fighters in the war. But only a handful of Escort fighters were nearby. One Thunderbolt pilot spotted the incoming wave first. Instead of retreating or waiting for backup, he pushed his massive fighter forward. Throttle full, propeller screaming. And then he dove straight into the enemy formation, turning the sky into chaos. The German pilots expected the American fighter to break away. Instead it attacked head-on. The Thunderbolt's 8 machine guns erupted in a blazing stream of tracers. One German fighter burst apart in flames. Another rolled away trailing smoke. The lone P-47 didn't try to turn tightly with the German aircraft. That would have been suicide. Instead, the pilot used the Thunderbolt's strength, speed in the dive. He slashed through the formation, diving away, then climbing back for another attack. Boom and zoom tactics. Strike fast. Disappear. Strike again. The Luftwaffe formation began to scatter. German pilots suddenly realized they weren't facing a slow, helpless aircraft. They were fighting a machine that could dive faster, hit harder, and absorb punishment that would destroy their own fighters. Each time they tried to pursue the P-47, the American pilot simply dropped into another blistering dive. And each pass through the formation brought another burst of .50 caliber fire. What German pilots experienced. To the German fighters, the Thunderbolt felt almost indestructible. Rounds struck its wings and fuselage, but the aircraft kept coming. The radial engine at the front acted like armor. Bullets that would have pierced the cooling system of a liquid-cooled engine simply buried themselves harmlessly in metal. The German pilots began to realize something unsettling. This wasn't a fragile dogfighter. It was a brawler. A fighter designed to smash through combat, deliver devastating firepower, and survive long enough to do it again. Within minutes, the carefully organized German interceptors had lost their advantage. Some fighters broke away. Others tried to chase the diving Thunderbolt and failed. By the time additional American escorts arrived, the Luftwaffe formation was already dispersing. The bomber formation continued toward its target. And the lone Thunderbolt pilot had held off an entire wave of interceptors long enough to save them. Strategic impact of the Thunderbolt. Stories like this became common as the war progressed. The P-47 quickly proved itself in both air-to-air combat and ground attack missions. With bombs and rockets attached, it became one of the most devastating fighter bombers of the war. Thunderbolts tore apart German railroads, convoys and armored columns after the Normandy landings in 1944. Pilots flew thousands of low-level attack missions, strafing anything that moved. By the end of the war, the P-47 had achieved over 3,700 enemy aircraft destroyed in air combat. Tens of thousands of ground targets destroyed. One of the highest survival rates for pilots of any Allied fighter. What had once been mocked as a clumsy aircraft had become a cornerstone of Allied air power. And the German pilots who faced it knew better than anyone. The Thunderbolt was never hopeless. It was simply misunderstood. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt had never been designed to look graceful. It was designed around power. At its heart sat the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, an 18-cylinder radial engine capable of producing more than 2,000 horsepower. To house that engine, the aircraft needed a huge fuselage and thick wings. The result was the heaviest single-engine fighter of the war. But weight brought advantages. The Thunderbolt could dive at terrifying speeds, often exceeding 500 miles per hour, faster than many German fighters could safely follow. Its 8.50 caliber machine guns gave it one of the heaviest gun batteries of any Allied fighter. And its rugged construction meant it could absorb incredible damage. Pilots often returned from missions with shredded wings, shattered panels, and bullet holes across the fuselage, yet the aircraft kept flying. American pilots quickly learned the Thunderbolt's secret. It wasn't a knife fighter. It was a hammer. Instead of turning with enemy aircraft, P-47 pilots attacked from above, diving through enemy formations with devastating speed and firepower before climbing back into position. In the hands of a skilled pilot, the aircraft became something the Luftwaffe hadn't expected. A fighter that could control the fight, even against overwhelming numbers. By the final years of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt had earned a reputation that few aircraft could match. What began as a fighter many doubted had transformed into one of the most reliable and destructive aircraft in the Allied arsenal. Its massive engine roared across the skies of Europe and the Pacific. Its 8 machine guns carved through enemy fighters and ground targets alike. And its rugged frame carried countless pilots home when other aircraft might have failed. More than 15,000 Thunderbolts were built during the war. They flew escort missions over Germany, blasted enemy armor after D-Day, and supported Allied troops across the continent. But perhaps the Thunderbolt's greatest achievement was something less measurable. It gave pilots confidence. Confidence that their aircraft could dive faster than the enemy. Confidence that it could hit harder than most fighters in the sky. And confidence that even under heavy fire, it might still bring them home. For the Luftwaffe pilots who once mocked its size and weight, the Thunderbolt eventually became something very different. A symbol of relentless American air power. A fighter that refused to break. And sometimes, as one pilot proved against a sky full of enemies, all it took was one Thunderbolt to change the outcome of a battle. Because in the chaos of war, legends are not built by perfect machines. They are built by machines, and pilots, that refuse to give up. And high above the battlefields of World War II, the Thunderbolt earned its name the hard way. With fire, steel, and the roar of 8 guns in the sky. As the war in Europe pushed toward its final chapters, the reputation of the P-47 Thunderbolt had changed completely. The fighter that many once dismissed as too heavy, too clumsy, and too slow had become one of the most respected aircraft in the Allied arsenal. Its thunderous engine was now a familiar sound across the battlefields of Europe. From the skies above Germany to the beaches of Normandy and the forests of the Ardennes, Thunderbolts were everywhere. They escorted bombers through walls of anti-aircraft fire. They battled the Luftwaffe high above the clouds. And when the fight moved to the ground, they descended like armored predators, rockets screaming from their wings, machine guns hammering anything that moved along German roads and railways. Few aircraft proved as versatile. Few proved as tough. By the end of World War II, the numbers told the story. More than 15,000 P-47 Thunderbolts had been built. They destroyed thousands of enemy aircraft in the air. On the ground, they shattered locomotives, tanks, convoys, artillery positions, and supply lines that kept the German war machine alive. But numbers alone don't explain the Thunderbolt's true legacy. Ask the pilots who flew it, and they often describe something simpler. Trust. They trusted the aircraft to protect them when flak tore through the sky. They trusted its massive engine to keep running even after taking hits. They trusted its strength when diving into enemy fighters who thought they had the advantage. That trust turned the Thunderbolt into more than just another fighter. It became a weapon of persistence. A machine that kept fighting even when logic said it shouldn't. And sometimes, as the Luftwaffe discovered during desperate interceptions over Europe, it only took one determined pilot and one heavily armed Thunderbolt to shatter an entire attack. Because history doesn't always remember the aircraft that looked the most elegant. It remembers the ones that refused to break. And in the violent skies of World War II, the P-47 Thunderbolt proved that even the fighter many once mocked as hopeless could become one of the most feared machines ever to take flight.